Greetings. So we're getting into the big US questions here, all worth 30 markers. You had a choice of three. This was the 2019 paper, may have been used for other mock exams as well. Evaluate the view that the US Constitution is out of date. An interesting question that allows you to bring in a huge amount of different ideas, and you'll see on the next slide that actually there's so many different ideas that you're probably not going to be able to see all of them. It is a question that is designed to make you think, to bring in different elements, and you will be marked on your ability to create a case one way or the other, to be balanced, to show a good understanding of the US kind of system as a whole in relation to the Constitution, to select a kind of breadth of different ideas, so not just kind of focusing in particular on one specific idea, to be able to analyze it, to kind of show the impact of it either being out of date or not out of date. It's a question that allows, that I think getting a C grade in, or around, let's say, band 3, is relatively straightforward as long as you can pick a few key areas where it's failing. And in getting an A grade in is something that, or band 5, is something that's definitely very possible if you're able to kind of really kind of think the question through, be creative, be inventive, bring in lots of different aspects. It also demonstrates your ability to show how much you know the US Constitution actually impacts the daily life of American politics, and actually because they have a constitution, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, Article 4, laying out the checks and balances and the systems of government, like it does make a big difference to everything from the powers of the president to the power of the Supreme Court and their judicial review, even to how the president is elected. So there's lots of different things that you could bring in, and should, and lots of things to discuss. It doesn't matter which way you go. I think there's valid arguments on both sides. It's not one of those questions where I kind of think, well, realistically, it's got to be this. And it's just a case that you need to kind of make that case. You do need to be balanced, so you must include arguments on both sides, and if you don't, you will be capped at band 2. But other than that, I think that's the only kind of trap that might exist here. You know, you have to make the case it is out of date and it's not out of date, but at the same time, build up the wall, knock it down, a phrase I use a lot, and you should know what that means by now. So let's start off by agreeing. If you can't see everything that's behind me, then sorry, and I will try and shift where I can, but I don't think it's going to matter because that's where the film is. So, brilliant. Looks like the disagreeing is going up first. Let's start by disagreeing that it is not out of date. So first of all, this is completely kind of outside the box, but America is the world's most successful democracy. It is the most powerful country in the world. If the Constitution was horrifically out of date, then the country just wouldn't function. It wouldn't be working. It wouldn't be successful. It wouldn't have this huge economy. It wouldn't have huge amounts of immigration with people trying to get in, the DACAs, the Dreamers, etc., etc. And then before you even get into the nitty-gritty of the political system, you've got to acknowledge that America's just doing very well as a kind of a country, and therefore you can credit, at least partially, the Constitution in that. It's not a failing state where you're looking to have revolution or civil war or anything like that. It is a successful democracy as well, where there are regular elections into all sorts of things. Also, to say that it's not out of date, the rights and freedoms of Americans have been protected from the tyranny of majority or passing changes in public opinion. So the Constitution means that any changes that happen have to happen slowly, because you have this complex and detailed amendment process, which means if you get a sudden shift in politics, so think Barack Obama to Donald Trump, you know, those are two very polarizing, two presidents that are very polarized from each other. It means although there has been this quick shift in terms of the executive and perhaps in Congress, that the Constitution is protected from quick shifts, passing changes in public opinion, and you'd have to get a significant majority, well up above 66%, and more in some cases, to get these kind of changes through. So the Constitution protects rights, protects freedom, and it stops any passing changes from becoming permanent parts of the American political system. The complex amendment process there prevents dangerous amendments to the Constitution from being passed. You know, there's the flag burning amendment, which has never managed to make it through. There's others we've talked about in class. You know, there are amendments which most Americans would probably like to do, but actually the system is set up in that there has to be overwhelming support for something before you can kind of get any amendments through. And that is good, says this side of the table, because it means that anything dangerous does not necessarily get through. Now, there are examples where they have got through, or unhelpful ones, like the prohibition of alcohol, which got through in whatever it was, 19 whatever, that then had to be kind of undone. That's probably one that's easy to kind of knock down if you want to do so, but you could combine point 2 and point 3 over there into making quite a significant argument to say that the amendment process protects Americans from having their rights removed, perhaps unlike in the UK, where a simple majority could remove your human rights tomorrow if they could pass it through. The Supreme Court, this side of the table argues, has done a good job of reflecting the meaning of the Constitution to reflect changing times. So one of the arguments to say it's out of date is obviously going to be that it is out of date. It doesn't keep up with public sentiment and beliefs. But the counter argument to that is actually, well, the Supreme Court does it for you. They've redefined cruel and unusual punishments. They've legalized abortion. They've prevented segregation. So there is an argument here that the interpretations of the Supreme Court, the ability of the Supreme Court to, in effect, rewrite the Constitution by reinterpreting its words, allows it to stay up to date without rewriting the whole document and changing its underlying meaning. Another one to say that actually the Constitution is fine is that federalism is an effective balance between strong national government and the state's rights and diversity. So yes, you've got one America under one Constitution, but you have 50 states, and these 50 states are very different from one another. And because you have this federal system, you are allowed to have many different laws in many different places. And the Constitution provides for that. It allows for diversity. It allows for different rights in different places and different priorities and all sorts. And so the Constitution is, as you probably remember, is deliberately vague in some places, specific in others, and that vagueness allows for diversity and allows for different ideas to kind of come through in different states. So you could write a good paragraph there talking about how the federal nature of the America is very successful. Also, this one perhaps links the first one with the bottom one. Americans, on the whole, really like their Constitution. They're very protective of the Constitution. They almost show a kind of reverence towards it. Obviously, not all Americans, and the same goes for things like the Supreme Court. But there is no great public call for a wholesale overhaul. There may be demands to reform the Electoral College. There may be demands to tweak this or to adjust that. But there is no great feeling of our Constitution is bad or their Constitution is bad. And if it was out of date, then this would be a hot button topic. I mean, how many of the Democratic candidates have been talking about massively redoing the Constitution? None of them. I mean, there's been there have been some significant talk over gun control, but that's it. Buttigieg was talking a bit about adjusting the Electoral College, but the fact that I can pick out individual examples and I'm not kind of saying, look, they all want to do this, it shows that there isn't it's not out of date. Go back to the wording of the question. Okay, so what are the arguments to say it is out of date? Well, first of all, there are some significant problems which is caused by the Constitution, which indicates it's out of date. Now, you could turn any one of these into significantly big paragraphs and you could kind of debate them and discuss them. So I'm just going to lump them all in together and kind of say these are some of the things you could have talked about. Look, the House of Representatives and Congress and Senate, they get gridlocked all the time. You know, that system of having two even houses could be argued that it's out of date, especially now we have a lack of bipartisanship. You know, combine those two things together. It might have worked, and this is the other thing about this question. It is now out of date, I think is the phrase, or is out of date. So there's an implication that it was fine and now it's not. That phrase out of date has an implication of, you know, the cucumber used to be fine, but now the cucumber is moldy. So you can and should be discussing the fact that it's not just wrong, it's out of date. And that's quite an important point in this essay, and that stronger students will tackle that point, out of date. So when America was not partisan, the gridlock didn't happen to the same extent, and therefore it wasn't out of date. But now we do have a partisan system, and therefore it's out of date. See the argument? Let me just check the time, so I've got a lesson. The Electoral College, again, perhaps wasn't out of date when there wasn't the same kind of party system, and the original founding fathers didn't have kind of parties. They worked more on an individual basis, whereas now we have, 2 out of the last 4 general elections have produced a non-majority winner. It keeps out third parties, blah, 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 blah. The Electoral College is causing all sorts of problems, to the point that even states themselves now are saying, well, we're going to vote for the majority winner or the popular vote winner. And there are falling levels of public support for the legislature and the executive. Donald Trump isn't popular across the whole of America, although his fans love him. The legislature, Congress, is actually very unpopular. Like, most people don't like the job that Congress does, and a lot of that comes to the way it's set up by the Constitution. The next bit should be on the next bullet point. Sorry, the amendment process is far too lengthy and complex. That should be an entirely separate bullet point. The amendment process for the Constitution it takes ages. You need huge amounts of support. You get stuck with things like gun rights that you might not necessarily want. You get stuck with an electoral college that clearly is gone. So, I mean, looking at all the other bits I've just kind of mentioned, you get stuck with these clearly outdated things, but because of the amendment process, they're jammed with them. So maybe even the amendment process is out of date and it needs something far more flexible. Now, let's counter that Supreme Court one. So maybe the Supreme Court helps to keep the country up to date, or maybe this unelected body has way too much power because it is the Supreme Court that is amending the Constitution rather than the democratically elected members of Congress and the President. And so you can bring in whatever examples you want here, but maybe this Supreme Court has become something it was never meant to be in terms of judicial review, and is taking on way too much power and rights, and this idea of an imperial judiciary has come forth as a significant problem. I don't know if you can see this one behind me, but I'll read it out. Congress does not have any real power in most foreign policy decisions, which is not what the framers intended when they gave it the power to declare war. So Congress was always supposed to be the one that was able to declare war. But in reality, over time, the president, as the commander-in-chief, has really taken that over to the point that the Congress hasn't declared war since 1945, and America has been to war many times since then. So maybe, go back to that phrase, maybe it's out of date. Maybe this needs to be readjusted. So either take it away from Congress or reinforce Congress's ability to control the president. There are examples recently of where they prevented the president from being active in Libya and Syria. So you can use that. You can knock that down if you want to. I've got examples and links where you could do that. And of course, there is an essay about foreign policy on here. But you could bring that argument into here and say that's a constitutional problem. The process for confirming presidential nominees has become overly political. I don't know how much of that one you can see, but Brett Kavanaugh, the Education Secretary, I want to say Nancy Pelosi, but that's wrong, Betsy DeVos, these have become partisan decisions. Even the impeachment process, link that in there, you could argue that's out of date, because this part, I think if I was going to do this essay, I think my big thread would be that the partisan nature of America is now wrecking the Constitution, because the impeachment process should work if everyone is acting independently, but if everyone is acting politically, it doesn't work. I think that would be my argument, but there's other ways to kind of tackle this one. And very quickly, some parts of the Constitution are clearly outdated and dangerous in today's modern society, e.g. the right to bear arms. So the first bullet point up there is more looking at how the system works. The bit down the bottom here is looking at the rights of citizens, which may well be seen to be out of date. Remembering, of course, that they still haven't managed to get that amendment in that guarantees the rights of women and ethnic minorities and all that kind of stuff. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but you well might. So those are the arguments. Doesn't matter which way you go, as long as you build up the walls and knock them down. But there's loads to talk about, as long as you're able to really think around this topic and bring in this wide variety of ideas in terms of these essays. The essays that will do badly here will be the ones that just focus on things like the right to bear arms, because everyone, that will occur to everyone. It's not wrong, but there's so much more to talk about. And so if your essay is narrow and just talks about that issue, it's not going to do well overall, and it's not going to compare well to other students who can. Okay, hope that was useful. Go and check out your individual feedback.